The crystal spires of Nexus Prime reached toward the purple sky like frozen lightning. And Ambassador Chen stood in the central chamber waiting for the judgment that everyone knew was coming. The Galactic Concordat had summoned her here. And when the Concordat summoned you, you came without question or delay. 47 species had representatives in this room, each one representing civilizations that had sailed between stars for thousands of years. Some had been spacefaring when humanity still thought the Earth was flat. Others had built empires that spanned dozens of systems before humans discovered fire. The weight of their combined history pressed down on everything, making the air itself feel heavy with expectation. Fleet Sage Carthex of the Tlani Empire stood at the center podium. His 4 arms folded in what Chen had learned was a gesture of absolute authority. His scales shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed his emotional state to other Tlani. Right now, they pulsed with something between irritation and contempt. "Ambassador Chen of Earth," Carthex began. His voice translated into perfect Mandarin by the quantum interpreter in her ear. "Humanity has violated the Treaty of Settled Borders. Your species has established military outposts in 7 systems that were designated as buffer zones. You have built colonies on worlds that fall within contested territories. This cannot stand." Chen kept her face neutral. She had expected this. Earth's expansion had been aggressive by galactic standards, but humanity needed room to grow, needed resources, needed a future that didn't depend entirely on one fragile planet. A representative from the insectoid Jothic hive clicked forward on 6 legs, its compound eyes reflecting the chamber's light in unsettling ways. "The human expansion threatens trade routes that have existed for 12,000 years. Your presence destabilizes regions that have known peace longer than your species has had written language." "We destabilize nothing," Chen replied. Keeping her voice level, "We settle uninhabited worlds and build an empty space. We have threatened no one." Carthex's scales flashed bright orange. "Anger in the Talani color spectrum? You threaten the order itself. You are children playing with weapons you barely understand. You achieved faster-than-light travel through scavenged predecessor technology, not through your own advancement. You do not belong in the community of civilized species." The words hung in the air like poison. Chen felt her jaw tighten, but forced herself to breathe slowly. Getting angry would accomplish nothing here. These species had decided humanity's fate before she ever set foot in this chamber. "The Galactic Concordat issues this ultimatum," Carthex continued, pulling up a holographic document that filled the space above the central podium. "Humanity will cease all colonization activities immediately. All military outposts in contested regions will be dismantled within 30 standard cycles. Earth will submit to Concordat oversight and accept limitations on your military capabilities. Your expansion will be regulated by this council going forward, and if we refuse," Chen asked, though she already knew the answer. "Then the Concordat will take corrective action," Carthex said simply. "We have maintained peace in this galaxy for over 8,000 years. We will not allow one aggressive species to unravel everything we have built. You have 30 cycles to respond with your compliance." The meeting ended without ceremony. Chen was escorted from the chamber by security drones that hummed with barely contained energy weapons. As she walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime, she passed representatives from other species. All of them looked at her with the same expression, pity mixed with inevitability. They had seen this before, aggressive young species that needed to be put in their place. Taught the rules, shown their proper position in the galactic hierarchy. The shuttle ride back to the human diplomatic vessel was silent. Chen's aide, a young man named Torres, kept glancing at her, as if waiting for her to explode with rage. But Chen had learned patience in her 40 years of diplomatic service. She had learned to wait, to think, to plan. "They're going to attack us," Torres said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," Chen agreed. "They're going to attack us. What do we do?" Chen looked out the viewport at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there, Earth hung in space, a blue marble that had survived ice ages and asteroid impacts, that had weathered the rise and fall of countless civilizations, that had brought forth a species stubborn enough to split atoms and touch other worlds. "We go home," she said. "We deliver their ultimatum. and then we see what humanity decides. The journey back to Earth took 3 weeks. Chen spent most of that time drafting her report, choosing each word carefully. The United Terran Assembly would read this document and make a decision that would determine humanity's future. Either they would bow to the Concordat's demands, or they would choose a different path. A harder path when they finally reached Earth orbit. Chen could see the planet below with its swirling white clouds and vast blue oceans. From up here it looked so peaceful, so small, it was easy to forget that this tiny world had produced Shakespeare and Einstein, had survived 2 world wars, had looked into the nuclear abyss, and stepped back. The shuttle descended through the atmosphere, and Chen watched as the landscape transformed from abstract patterns into recognizable features. Mountain ranges, rivers, cities glowing with electric light. They landed at the diplomatic port in Geneva. Where the assembly maintained its headquarters, the chamber was packed when Chen entered. Representatives from every nation on Earth had gathered to hear her report. The president of the United Terran Assembly, an elderly woman named Adayami, sat at the central chair, her face grave. Chen delivered her report without emotion, reciting the Concordat's demands exactly as they had been given. When she finished, silence filled the chamber. No one spoke for a long moment. Finally, a representative from the Pacific Coalition stood. "They want us to dismantle our defenses and submit to their control," he said, his voice shaking with barely controlled anger. "They want us to accept permanent second-class status. They want us to know our place," another representative added bitterly. President Adayami raised her hand for silence. "We have 30 days to respond," she said. "This decision cannot be made hastily. We need to consider all options," but Chen saw something in Adami's eyes. Something hard and unyielding. She had seen that look before. In the eyes of people who had decided that some things were worth fighting for over the next 29 days. The debate raged across Earth. Some argued for compliance, pointing out that humanity could not possibly win a war against 47 advanced species. Others argued for defiance, saying that freedom once surrendered could never be reclaimed. Military commanders presented classified briefings about humanity's actual defensive capabilities. Scientists discussed theoretical weapons. Historians analyzed every war humanity had ever fought, looking for lessons that might apply to interstellar conflict, and through it all, one question dominated every discussion. What were they willing to sacrifice for the right to determine their own destiny? On the 30th day, Ambassador Chen stood before the assembly one final time. President Adayami had made the decision, and now Chen would have to deliver humanity's answer to the galaxy. "Are you ready?" Adayami asked. Chen nodded. "I am." "Then tell them," Adayami said, and her voice carried the weight of 7 billion human souls. "Tell them exactly what we decided." Chen returned to Nexus Prime alone. The crystal spires looked the same, but everything felt different now. She knew that what she was about to say would change everything, would set in motion events that could not be stopped. The Concordat chamber filled once more with representatives from 47 species. They looked confident, certain of humanity's response. Karthek stood at the central podium, his scales pulsing with satisfied blue. "Ambassador Chen," he began, "has humanity prepared its compliance documents?" Chen walked to the speaker's platform. She looked at each representative in turn, meeting their eyes, reading their certainty, their arrogance, their complete conviction that no rational species would dare challenge the established order. "Humanity declines," she said, just 2 words, clear and final. Then she turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt like the galaxy itself had stopped breathing. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before the Concordat chamber erupted into chaos. Fleet Sage Karthek stood frozen at his podium, his scales flickering through color so rapidly they created a strobing effect that hurt to watch. Around him, representatives from 47 species began shouting at once, some in anger, some in disbelief, some in languages the translation systems couldn't keep up with. "Order," Karthek bellowed, his voice amplified to override the noise. "Order in this chamber." It took several minutes for the chaos to subside. when it finally did. The council chamber felt less like a place of dignified governance and more like a war room. Did she just begin the representative from the Vryn collective? A crystalline being whose thoughts manifested as visible light patterns, did the human just refuse? Without negotiation? Without counterproposal? She declined, confirmed the Jothic representative, its mandibles clicking nervously. No explanation, no justification. Just refusal. Karthek slammed one of his 4 fists on the podium. This is unacceptable, unprecedented. No species in 8,000 years has simply refused a concordant ultimatum. There are protocols, procedures. There are diplomatic channels for disagreement. Perhaps we should establish communication, suggested an elder from the peaceful Luminae, whose species had not fought a war in 6 millennia. Clearly, there has been a misunderstanding. There is no misunderstanding, Karthek growled. Humanity understands perfectly. They are choosing defiance. They believe we will not follow through with our threats, and we must demonstrate our resolve, said the war prime of the Keshian Dominion. A species that prided itself on military tradition, a swift strike, minimal casualties, a demonstration that we are serious. The debate continued for hours. But eventually the council reached consensus. They would allow a brief cooling-off period. Perhaps humanity needed time to reconsider. Perhaps internal politics would force Earth's leaders to see reason. They decided to wait 1 week, then attempt to re-establish communication. That week passed in strange silence. Every attempt to contact Earth went unanswered. Diplomatic channels that had been open for decades suddenly closed. Human ambassadors at every Concordat world packed their belongings and departed without explanation. Human trade ships returned to Terran space and didn't come back out. It's like they've sealed themselves off, observed a junior analyst from the Jothic hive named Krytik. She had been studying human behavior for 3 years, and something about this silence bothered her deeply. Every human facility, every embassy, every trade outpost, they're all pulling back behind their borders, her supervisor. A senior intelligence officer waved a dismissive limb. They're preparing for isolation. When we cut off their trade, they'll come crawling back within months. Human industry depends on imports they can't produce themselves, but Sir Critic protested. Their behavior pattern doesn't match predictions when species face overwhelming force. They typically increase communication, trying to find diplomatic solutions. Humans have gone completely dark. They're panicking, the supervisor said with certainty. Fear causes irrational behavior, but Krytik wasn't convinced. She began pulling historical records on humanity. Going back to their pre-space flight era, what she found disturbed her. Humans had fought 2 global wars in their 20th century. Conflicts so massive they had threatened to extinguish their entire civilization. They had developed nuclear weapons and pointed them at each other for decades. Living under the constant threat of mutual annihilation, they had survived plagues, famines, and natural disasters that would have broken other species. And in every case, when humans faced existential threats, they didn't collapse, they adapted. She compiled her findings into a report titled Concerning Patterns in Human Conflict Behavior, and submitted it to the Intelligence Committee. The report was filed away unread, marked as the paranoid speculation of a junior analyst. 2 weeks after humanity's refusal, the Concordat sent another delegation to Earth demanding communication. The delegation's ship was denied entry to Terran space. Not attacked, just denied. A simple message broadcast on all frequencies: the territory beyond this point is closed. Turn back, the delegation returned empty-handed. This is intolerable. Karthek raged at an emergency council session. They treat us like we are the ones who must negotiate on their terms. They forget who has the power here. What are they doing in there? Asked the Vryn representative. Our intelligence networks have gone blind. We cannot see into their systems anymore. It was true. Human space had become a black box. Spy satellites that had monitored human military installations found their signals jammed. Informants within human colonies stopped reporting. Trade ships that might have carried intelligence gatherers were no longer permitted to dock at human stations. They're building something, Krytik insisted at another intelligence briefing. This level of information security only makes sense if they're preparing for war. With what? Her supervisor scoffed. We've seen their fleet. Outdated vessels using technology 3 generations behind our own. They have perhaps 200 capital ships against our combined fleet of over 10,000. Mathematics doesn't lie. But what if we haven't seen their full capabilities? Krydik asked, what if they've been hiding their true strength? Impossible, the supervisor declared. Our intelligence is thorough. We know exactly what humanity has, a month after the refusal. Carthex convinced the council to authorize a show of force. Nothing too aggressive, just a fleet exercise near human borders. A reminder of Concordat power. 300 warships assembled at the border of Terran space. Representing 12 different Concordat species, it was an impressive display. Enough firepower to reduce an entire planet to molten slag. The fleet broadcast on all frequencies, demanding that Earth send representatives to discuss their compliance. The only response was that same simple message. Turn back, they're bluffing, Carthex told his commanders. They have to be bluffing. No rational species would maintain this posture against such odds. But the human borders remained closed. The silence remained unbroken in her small office on Nexus Prime. Krydik stared at her research screens. She had been digging deeper into human history, focusing on something humans called total war, a concept that didn't translate well into any Concordat language. The closest she could come was conflict without limitation, war where entire civilizations mobilized every resource, where civilian and military distinctions blurred, where winning became the only acceptable outcome regardless of cost. Most Concordat species had never fought that way. They'd evolved past such destructive approaches to conflict. Wars were now limited affairs, fought with specific objectives and predetermined rules of engagement. Losses were calculated and accepted only up to certain thresholds. But humans had fought wars where they firebombed their own cities to deny them to enemies, where they developed weapons capable of destroying their entire world, where surrender was considered worse than death. Krydik updated her report, adding sections on human military doctrine, economic mobilization capacity, and historical parallels. She flagged it as urgent and submitted it again. Again, it was filed away 6 weeks after the refusal. The Concordat's patience ran out. We have given them every opportunity, Carthex declared. We have shown restraint. We have offered to negotiate. They have answered with silence and defiance. The time has come to remind humanity of their place in this galaxy. The Council voted to authorize limited military action. 3 human frontier outposts in the Arcturus system would be neutralized. Not destroyed completely, but damaged enough to force Earth back to the negotiating table. Minimal casualties, the Council mandated. This is a corrective measure. Not a war, the strike fleet began preparations. 300 ships loaded with weapons and marines, prepared for what everyone assumed would be a brief engagement. Human resistance was expected to be minimal, possibly non-existent. They'll see our fleet coming, predicted the Keshan War Prime. And they'll surrender those stations without firing a shot. This is all theater, really. A reminder of reality, Carthex wasn't quite so confident. Something about the human silence bothered him. Though he couldn't articulate why, it was like standing at the edge of a dark forest. Unable to see what waited in the shadows, what if they fight? Asked one of his junior officers. Then they'll lose quickly, Carthex replied. And perhaps learn humility in defeat. The strike fleet departed 3 days later. It would take them 2 weeks to reach the Arcturus system. 2 weeks during which intelligence analysts tried and failed to penetrate the curtain of silence surrounding human space. In her office, Krydik watched the fleet depart and felt a cold certainty settle in her thorax. She had read the histories, had studied the patterns, had seen what humans were capable of when cornered. She pulled up her report one final time and added a single line at the top in bright red text. We are making a catastrophic mistake. Then, she sent it directly to Fleet Sage Carthex's personal console. Bypassing all the usual channels, it was automatically deleted as spam from an unauthorized sender. The Concordat strike fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Arcturus system with all the confidence of overwhelming superiority. 300 warships spread into attack formation, their weapons systems coming online in a coordinated sequence that had been practiced for thousands of years. Each ship knew its role. Each captain understood the mission parameters. Disable the 3 human military outposts. Minimize casualties. Demonstrate Concordat resolve all ships. This is Fleet Sage Carthex. The commander's voice echoed across the battle network. Remember, we are here to correct, not to destroy. Target weapons, systems, and power generation only. No civilian structures. The fleet began its approach toward the inner system where the human outposts waited. According to intelligence reports, each station housed approximately 5,000 personnel and was defended by minimal weapons platforms. The engagement was expected to last no more than 20 minutes. "Sir," reported the sensor officer on Carthex's flagship, "I'm detecting the 3 outposts at expected coordinates. All appear fully operational. Any sign of evacuation?" Carthex asked. "Negative, sir. All stations appear to be at normal operational status. Life support active. Power systems running normally." Carthex's scales flickered yellow. Uncertainty mixing with confusion, they had given humanity 6 weeks' warning. 6 weeks during which any rational species would have evacuated non-essential personnel. But the stations appeared fully staffed, as if nothing unusual was happening. "Perhaps they're expecting us to back down," suggested the tactical officer. "They're calling what they think is a bluff." "Then they're about to learn an expensive lesson," Carthex replied. "All ships, prepare to engage. Fire on my command." The fleet closed to optimal firing range. Spreading out to ensure overlapping fields of fire, it was a textbook approach. Exactly what the Concordat military had done hundreds of times before when dealing with unruly species. "Sir, we're being hailed," reported the communications officer. Audio only from one of the stations. Put it through. A human voice filled the bridge. Calm and almost conversational. "Concordat fleet, this is Station Arcturus 1. You are in violation of Terran's sovereign space. Turn back immediately, or you will be fired upon." Several officers on the bridge made sounds that might have been laughter. The idea of 3 primitive outposts threatening 300 advanced warships was absurd. "This is Fleet Sage Carthex of the Galactic Concordat," he replied. "You have been designated for corrective action due to your government's refusal to comply with Concordat mandates. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will be met with appropriate force, you were warned," the human voice said simply. "And the channel closed? Target the weapons platforms," Carthex ordered. "Fire when ready." The first wave of Concordat weapons lanced out across the void. Plasma bolts and particle beams designed to disable rather than destroy. They struck the human station's defensive shields, which flared and held. That was expected. Even primitive shields could withstand a first volley, then the shields vanished. "Their defenses are down," reported the tactical officer. "One more volley should the sensor board erupted in warnings." "Contacts," shouted the sensor officer. "Multiple contacts decloaking. Ranges from 10,000 to 50,000 kilometers. I count over 100 vessels." "Impossible," Carthex breathed, staring at his tactical display as it suddenly filled with red enemy markers. The human ships had been there all along, hiding in the electromagnetic shadow of the gas giant's rings, masked by stealth technology that shouldn't have existed. Now they revealed themselves, and Carthex felt his scales go ice-white with shock. These weren't the outdated human ships intelligence had reported. These were vessels he had never seen before, sleek and angular, bristling with weapons that registered as unknown configurations on his sensors, evasive maneuvers. He shouted, "All ships, scatter and regroup." But the humans had chosen their moment perfectly. The first human strike hit the Concordat fleet like a hammer. Thousands of small projectiles traveling at significant fractions of light speed. They didn't explode. They didn't need to, at those velocities. Simple kinetic impacts released more energy than most conventional warheads. The Keshan cruiser Pride of Victory took 7 railgun rounds through its midsection and broke apart in a silent explosion of atmosphere and debris. The Vryn Dreadnought Crystal Dawn's shields collapsed under a sustained barrage in its crystalline, structure shattered like glass. A Talani destroyer simply vanished in a flash of light as a human missile struck its reactor, returned fire. Karthek screamed, "All ships, return fire!" The Concordat fleet began to respond, but they were scattered, surprised, and facing an enemy that fought with tactics they had never encountered. Human ships didn't engage in the orderly broadside exchanges the Concordat was used to. They moved in coordinated packs, appearing from unexpected vectors, striking hard, then vanishing behind walls of jamming and electronic warfare. Their targeting was precise and brutal, focusing on command ships and vessels with strong shields first. A swarm of small human craft, each no bigger than a fighter, descended on a Lumine hospital ship. The ship's captain was still broadcasting non-combatant status when the fighters attached themselves to the hull and detonated. The explosion was carefully calculated, destroying engines and weapons, but leaving the medical sections intact. The message was clear. Non-combatants would be disabled but spared. Combatants would not be so lucky. "They're targeting our command structure," realized Karthex's tactical officer. "They're trying to decapitate our fleet organization," as if to confirm this analysis. The flagship shuddered as human weapons struck its shields. Karthex watched his shield indicators drop rapidly under sustained fire from 3 human cruisers that had appeared from nowhere. "Get us out of their firing line," he ordered. "Emergency jump now." "Jump drives need 3 minutes to charge, sir." "Then buy us 3 minutes." The battle had become chaos. The Concordat fleet's numerical advantage meant nothing when they couldn't coordinate their attacks. Human jamming was disrupting their battle network, making it impossible for ships to communicate effectively. Each Concordat vessel was fighting its own isolated battle, unable to support its allies. A wing of human bombers broke through the defensive screen around a Talani carrier. Their missiles struck not the ship itself, but the launch bays, setting off chain reactions that cooked off the stored fighter craft inside. The carrier survived, but was rendered combatant effective in seconds. Karthex watched his tactical display with growing horror as red enemy markers danced through his formation. While friendly markers winked out one by one, this wasn't supposed to happen. The Concordat military had fought dozens of conflicts against primitive species. It always followed the same pattern: overwhelming force, quick surrender, minimal losses. But humans weren't following the pattern, sir. "We've lost 40 ships, reported the tactical officer, his voice shaking. "Another 15 are heavily damaged. We need to withdraw. We outnumber them 2 to 1. Karthex protested, even as another Concordat ship died on his display. "Sir, we're losing. We need to withdraw now before they destroy the entire fleet," a human attack craft, smaller than anything on Concordat sensors, slipped past the flagship's point defense and released a projectile that struck the ship's primary communications array. Suddenly, Karthex couldn't communicate with his fleet at all. He watched through his viewports as Concordat ships fought and died. Some were trying to withdraw, their jump drives charging as they desperately held off human attackers. Others were surrendering, their captains choosing capture over annihilation. The 3 human outposts that were supposed to be easy targets sat untouched at the center of the system, their weapon systems tracking targets but holding fire. They hadn't needed to shoot. The mobile fleet had handled everything. "Jump drives charged," announced the navigation officer. "Jump!" Karthex ordered, not caring where they went as long as it was away from this nightmare. The flagship tore a hole in space and fled over the next hour. The surviving Concordat ships followed. Those that could jump did so. Those that couldn't surrendered or were destroyed. When the last enemy vessel was either gone or captured, the human fleet regrouped. Admiral Okoy stood on the bridge of the TNS Defiance, watching as damage reports came in. The humans had lost 8 ships destroyed and another 12 damaged. Compared to the Concordat's losses, it was a stunning victory. "Get me a count on survivors," she ordered. "I want all Concordat survivors treated according to the Terran conventions. Medical care for the wounded, proper conditions for prisoners, yes." "Ma'am," her executive officer replied. "What about their ships?" "We captured 7 vessels, mostly intact. Secure them. I want our intelligence people going through every system. Every database. Everything," Okoy said. "And get me an open channel to Earth. The Secretary General needs to know we won. But as she watched the debris field spreading through Arcturus space, she felt no triumph. She had spent 30 years in the Terran Navy, had fought in the resource wars and the colony rebellions. She knew what war cost, knew that victories were measured not in destroyed enemies, but in lives that would never come home. The news of the Arcturus disaster reached Nexus Prime 18 hours after the battle ended, and the Concordat Council chamber descended into pandemonium. Fleet Sage Carthex stood before the assembly, with his scales a dull gray, the tawny color of shame and defeat. His uniform was scorched in places where debris had struck his flagship during the desperate escape. Behind him, holographic displays showed the battle from multiple angles, captured by the few censored drones that had survived. 112 ships lost, Carthex reported, his voice hollow, another 43 damaged beyond immediate repair. Casualty estimates exceed 20,000 dead. 15,000 captured. The council sat in stunned silence, watching the recordings of human ships appearing from nowhere, moving with coordination that seemed almost prescient, striking with weapons that tore through Concordat shields like they were paper. How? Demanded the Vrin representative, its light patterns flickering with confusion and fear. Our intelligence said they had primitive vessels, outdated technology. How did they field a fleet we knew nothing about? They lied to us, suggested the Keshian War Prime. For years they've been hiding their true capabilities, showing us what they wanted us to see, or we saw what we expected to see, said a quiet voice from the back of the chamber. Everyone turned to see Krydik, the junior Jothic analyst, standing at the observers section. She had no official right to speak in council, but no one moved to silence her. Explain yourself, Carthex demanded. Krytik moved forward, her 6 legs clicking on the crystal floor. I submitted reports, she said. 3 separate reports warning that human behavior did not match our predictions, that their silence indicated preparation rather than fear, that their history suggested they would fight rather than submit. All 3 reports were ignored? You're a junior analyst? Scoffed the intelligence director. You lack the experience to interpret. I lack the arrogance, Krydik interrupted. I looked at humans as they are, not as we wanted them to be. Every species in this chamber has been spacefaring for thousands of years. We've forgotten what it means to fight for survival. We wage war like it's a chess match, with rules and limitations and acceptable losses. She activated her datapad and threw information onto the central display. Humans call it total war, and they've done it before. In their year 1939, their entire planet went to war. Every resource, every citizen, every scrap of industrial capacity mobilized for one purpose: victory. They developed weapons that could destroy their own world. And they did it in less than 6 years? Ancient history dismissed the Keshian. They were primitive then. They were desperate then, Krydik corrected. And we made them desperate again when we issued our ultimatum. We didn't give them a negotiation. We gave them a choice: submit or die. So they prepared for war for 6 weeks? Carthex said. You're saying they built an entire hidden fleet in 6 weeks? No, Krydik replied. They built it over years, while we watched and saw only what confirmed our assumptions. They showed us old ships on patrol routes, let us inspect facilities that looked primitive, fed us intelligence that made them seem weak, and we believed it because it fit our narrative of young, inexperienced species. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If Krydik was right, humanity had been playing a different game the entire time, preparing for a confrontation they knew would come. We need to mobilize the full Concordat military, declared the Keshian War Prime. Commit everything. Humanity must be made to understand they cannot win against our combined might. Can they? Asked the Luminae elder softly. We just lost over 100 ships to a force a third our size. What happens when we commit more forces and they've prepared for that too? They have to have losses, the Keshian insisted. They have to have limitations. No species has infinite resources, but we don't know what their limitations are, Krydik pointed out. We don't know how many ships they have, how many weapons they've developed, how far they're willing to go. As the debate raged, reports began flooding in from across Concordat space. Human merchant vessels that had been trading peacefully for years suddenly stopped showing up at ports. At first, it seemed like they were just withdrawing to Terran space. A defensive move, then the attacks began. A Concordat supply convoy heading to a military outpost never arrived. Search parties found debris and no survivors. A mining operation in the Kepler sector went dark when investigators arrived. They found the facilities stripped of everything valuable and the workers gone. Human freighters appearing on shipping lanes, not to trade but to seize Concordat cargo vessels, taking supplies and equipment before vanishing again. They're waging economic warfare, realized the trade coordinator, a bureaucrat from the mercantile Vex species. They're disrupting our supply lines, our resource networks. They're not fighting another set-piece battle. They're bleeding us across 1,000 small cuts. Pirates spat the Keshan. We'll hunt them down and destroy them. With what ships? Carthex asked bitterly. We just lost 1/10 of our ready fleet. The rest are scattered across the galaxy. It would take months to concentrate enough force to mount another offensive. Then we mobilize the reserve fleets, the Keshion said. Call up every ship, every species, show humanity the true might of the Concordat. But that night, 3 Concordat species sent secret diplomatic overtures to their neighbors, asking about terms for separate peace with humanity. The Vrin Collective, still mourning the loss of the Crystal Dawn, announced they were withdrawing their ships from Concordat military operations. The Luminae, whose hospital ship had been disabled at Arcturus, declared themselves non-combatant and neutral. The great alliance that had kept peace for 8,000 years was beginning to fracture. They're scared, observed President Didymi from her office on Earth. Watching intelligence reports of the Concordat's internal debates, they thought they were dealing with children. Now they're realizing they started a fight with someone who knows how to finish it. Should we offer terms? Asked Secretary General Chen, who had returned from Nexus Prime to help coordinate Earth's war effort. Give them a way to end this without further bloodshed. Not yet, Adayami said. They came to us with demands when they thought they held all the cards. They need to understand that negotiations happen between equals, not between masters and servants, until they're ready to meet us as equals. We keep the pressure on, and the pressure increased. Human intelligence operatives, working through networks established during years of peaceful trade, began sowing information throughout Concordat space. Records of human wars, footage of nuclear weapons tests, documentation of conflicts where humans had burned their own cities rather than surrender them to enemies. The Concordat populations, living in societies that had not seen real war in millennia, reacted with horror. This wasn't the kind of conflict they understood. Wars were supposed to be limited, civilized, with rules and boundaries. They fight like animals, declared one popular Concordat broadcaster, a statement that was quickly shared across human networks with dry commentary. Animals don't build starships, but they do remember how to bite. Public opinion in Concordat space began to shift. Why were they fighting humans over some disputed border systems anyway? Was it worth thousands of lives? Some species began questioning the wisdom of the original ultimatum critic, now reluctantly elevated to senior analysts after her predictions proved accurate. Spent her days trying to assess human capabilities. It was like trying to count stars in a nebula. Every time she thought she had a number, new information revealed it was incomplete. They have at least 300 capital ships we knew nothing about, she reported at a briefing. But their industrial capacity suggests they could have more. They have weapons platforms we've never encountered, railguns, nuclear missiles, something they call relativistic kinetic kill vehicles that are essentially just masses accelerated to near light speed. Barbaric, muttered someone in the back. Effective, critic corrected. They don't follow our conventions for warfare because they never agreed to them. They fight to win, not to score points or demonstrate superiority to them. This is existential. 6 months after the Battle of Arcturus, the Concordat military still had not mounted another major offensive. They were bogged down playing defense against human raiders trying to protect supply lines, and dealing with the political fallout of their initial defeat. Fleet Sage Carthex, stripped of his command but kept on as an advisor, sat in a small office reviewing battle reports. He had spent the last 6 months trying to understand how he had been so wrong. We thought young meant weak, he said to Krydik, who had come to consult on intelligence matters. We thought primitive meant helpless. We saw a species that only recently learned to cross between stars and assumed they were inferior. You assumed conflict would follow your rules, Krydik replied, that they would fight the way Concordat species fight, with restraint and civilization, and instead they fight like a species that nearly destroyed itself and learned from the experience, Krydik finished. They know what war costs. They've paid that price before, and they're willing to pay it again if they must. 18 months after humanity declined to negotiate, a Concordat diplomatic vessel approached Earth orbit broadcasting continuously on all frequencies. We request permission to discuss terms of peace. The message repeated for 3 hours before it received a response. Permission granted, proceed to Geneva. Ambassador Chen will meet you. The delegation that descended to Earth's surface was smaller than the one that had issued the original ultimatum. Only 12 species sent representatives, and several of those who came were not the same individuals who had stood in the crystal chamber at Nexus Prime. Some of those officials no longer held their positions. Casualties of political upheaval and popular backlash, Fleet Sage Carthex was there. Though he now held no official title beyond military consultant, his scales had lost their luster, and he moved like someone much older than his actual years. The war had aged him. They were escorted to the same assembly hall where humanity had debated their response to the Concordat ultimatum. The room was less grand than the crystal spires of Nexus Prime, built of stone and wood rather than exotic materials, but it had a solidity to it, a sense of permanence that came from being built by hands on the world that had birthed humanity. Ambassador Chen, now Secretary General Chen, waited at the central table. She wore a simple dark suit. No decorations or military insignia. Behind her stood President Adayami and Admiral Okoye, representing the diplomatic and military branches of the Terran government. Thank you for seeing us, began the Vrin representative. Its light pattern subdued and respectful. Thank you for coming, Chen replied. Her tone neutral. They sat, and for a moment no one spoke. The delegates looked around the room at the stone walls and wooden furniture. At the humans who sat across from them. These were the beings they had thought to intimidate, to control, to force into submission. Finally, the Keshan representative spoke. We come to discuss terms of peace. Then let's discuss them, Chen said. The Terran Assembly has authorized me to negotiate on the following points. First, recognition of human sovereignty over all systems currently under Terran control, including the 7 systems that were designated as buffer zones. Second, reparations for damages inflicted during the unprovoked attack on our Arcturus facilities. Third, a permanent seat on the Concordat Council with full voting rights. Equivalent to any other member species, the delegates exchanged glances. These were not the terms of a defeated party begging for mercy. These were the demands of a victor. Those terms are, the Kession began, substantial. So was your initial ultimatum, Chen replied calmly. You demanded we dismantle our defenses, accept permanent subordination, and submit to your control. We declined. You attacked. We defended ourselves. Now we are here. The question is whether you're ready to negotiate in good faith or whether you need further demonstration of our resolve. You've made your point, said the Lumine Elder, its bioluminescence pulsing with what might have been sadness. You've proven you can fight, that you will fight. The galaxy understands this now, does it? Admiral Okoye asked, speaking for the first time. Because from where we sit, it looks like the galaxy spent 18 months trying to figure out how to win, rather than accepting that this conflict was built on a false premise. What false premise? Asked the Vrin. That might makes right, Okoye said. That because you were older, more numerous, more established, you could dictate terms to us. You didn't come to Earth seeking partnership or understanding. You came with threats and demands. You made this a test of wills. Not a negotiation between peers. We were, Carthex began, then stopped. He seemed to struggle with something internal before continuing. We were arrogant. We saw your youth as your species and assumed incompetence. We saw your smaller territory and assumed weakness. We committed the oldest error in warfare. We underestimated our opponent. You did more than that, President Adayami said, her voice gentle but firm. You forgot that conflict has costs for thousands of years. The Concordat has maintained peace through the threat of overwhelming force. But you forgot what it means to actually pay the price of war. You fight like it's a game with rules and acceptable losses. And you fight like it's the end of the world, the Kession said. Not quite accusingly, because for us it could have been, Chen replied. You gave us a choice between submission and extinction. Given those options, we chose extinction. We prepared for total war. We mobilized every resource, readied every weapon, prepared our people for the worst, because we learned long ago that some things are worth fighting for. And freedom is at the top of that list, the Jothic representative. Not Krytik, but a senior official, clicked forward. We have studied your history, it said. Your World War II, your Cold War, your resource wars. You are a species that has stared into the abyss of self-annihilation multiple times. Most species would have destroyed themselves. You somehow survived. We survived because we learned, Okoi said. We learned that war is horror, that it destroys everything it touches, that victory often looks like defeat when you count the true costs. But we also learned that there are worse things than fighting. Slavery is worse. Subjugation is worse. Losing the right to determine your own future is worse. You killed 20,000 of our people at Arcturus, said the Keshen quietly. You attacked us, Okoi replied, her voice hard now. You brought 300 warships to our territory with the intent to destroy our installations and force our surrender. What did you expect? That we would simply let you? We defended ourselves, and we defended effectively. But we also took prisoners, treated your wounded, and followed every rule of warfare that we value. Compare our conduct to what you threatened to do to us. The room fell silent. The Concordat delegates had no answer to that. Why'd you fight so hard? Carthex asked suddenly. You could have negotiated after Arcturus. You had proven your point, made us respect your capabilities. But instead you escalated. You raided our supply lines, disrupted our trade, spread information about your history throughout our space. Why push us so hard? Chen leaned forward, her expression intent. Because you needed to understand something fundamental. This wasn't a dispute over border systems or territorial rights. This was about whether humanity would be allowed to exist as a free species or whether we would be subjugated. You thought you could strike us, hurt us, and force us back to negotiating from a position of weakness. We needed you to know that would never happen, Adayami continued. That every time you attacked, we would respond. That every time you tried to coerce us, we would resist. That the only way this conflict would end was with you accepting us as equals. Not as subjects. You wanted us here, the Vrin said slowly. Understanding dawning in this room, asking for peace. Not offering it? Yes, Chen confirmed. We wanted you to understand what it means to negotiate with humanity. We don't come to the table because we're weak. We come because we choose to. And we expect the same choice to be given to us, the Keshen War Prime, who had lost 3 ships under his command during the Battle of Arcturus, leaned back in his chair. You could have destroyed us, he said during the battle. Your ships had targeting solutions on our hospital ships, our supply vessels, even the refugee transports we had standing by. Your Admiral Okoi could have killed tens of thousands more, maybe hundreds of thousands, but you didn't. Why? Okoi met his gaze. Because we're not monsters, she said simply. We know the difference between enemies and non-combatants. We know the difference between defense and slaughter. You may think we're barbarians because we're willing to fight, but we have lines we won't cross, rules we won't break. We could have made this war far bloodier. We chose not to. That restraint, the Lumine Elder said softly, is more frightening than your weapons. It means you're in control. That every action you take is calculated, deliberate. That you could unleash far worse and simply choose not to. Now you're beginning to understand, Chen said. The negotiations continued for 3 days. The Concordat delegates tried to negotiate better terms, to reduce the reparations, to limit human expansion, to maintain some face-saving element of control. Chen refused every attempt. These terms are non-negotiable, she said. You come as equals, or not at all. On the third day, the Concordat agreed. The Treaty of Geneva was signed in a ceremony broadcast across the galaxy. Humanity received recognition as a sovereign species, reparations totaling 50 billion Concordat credits, and a permanent council seat in exchange. Humanity agreed to cease hostile operations and establish diplomatic relations with all Concordat species. At the signing ceremony, Carthex approached Chen. "I need to ask you something," he said. "That day at Nexus Prime, when you said humanity declines, did you know? Did you know we would attack? That you would win?" Chen considered the question carefully. "We didn't know we would win," she admitted. "We knew we would fight. We knew we had prepared for war, but war is chaos, and victory is never guaranteed. What we knew was that submission was unacceptable, that we would rather die free than live as slaves." "And if you had lost at Arcturus?" Carthex asked.